She faced judgment daily, until a black man's subtle actions changed everything forever. The afternoon sun hung lazily in the sky, its warm golden light spilling across the urban park like liquid honey. Leaves fluttered softly in the gentle breeze, creating a whispering chorus that mingled with the distant laughter of children playing along the winding paths. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee and buttery pastries drifted from a nearby cafe, blending subtly with the faint hum of city life beyond the park's edges. The park itself was a patchwork of bustling activity and intimate corners. Joggers passed by in rhythmic stride, while benches tucked under broad oaks offered quiet respites for those seeking solitude. Amid the lively backdrop, there was a subtle contrast, a feeling of stillness in certain pockets where shadows lengthened, and the golden hour began to paint everything it touched. Sunlight filtered through the branches, casting soft, dappled patterns on cobblestone paths and park benches. It seemed as if the park itself was aware of the emotions that moved through it, each beam of light highlighting the delicate tension between the laughter that echoed freely and the silent corners where solitude lingered. The distant sounds of the city were muted here, yet not entirely absent. A soft honk from a far-off street, the gentle clatter of cups from the cafe, the faint rustle of newspaper pages turning, all contributed to the park's layered symphony. Every sensory detail was magnified by the calm warmth of the afternoon. The air carried not only the scent of coffee, but also the faint tang of autumn leaves, mingling with the gentle warmth that brushed the skin. Every breath seemed infused with a quiet clarity, a reminder that life continued to flow, even amidst personal struggles and quiet sorrows. In one of the park's quieter corners, sunlight pooled like a spotlight over a simple wooden bench half hidden under the shade of a sprawling oak. Here, the light felt both intimate and exposing, illuminating every detail of the space with golden clarity. A soft shadow stretched across the cobblestones, lengthening with the day's slow descent, hinting at the fleeting nature of time and the transience of moments. The breeze carried a gentle, almost musical rustle of leaves, punctuated by the occasional chirp of a bird perched nearby. Each sound, each flicker of movement, contributed to a tapestry of emotion, an environment simultaneously alive and contemplative. The park's layout invited both observation and reflection. Artisan shops lined the nearby street, their facadas charming and worn, windows catching the light in gleaming fragments. The aroma of baked goods and brewed coffee beckoned passers-by. Yet within the park itself, there were secluded corners, where a single bench could feel like a private world. Here, one could watch life unfold, the laughter of children chasing each other, joggers pacing with rhythmic precision, couples strolling hand in hand while still feeling the quiet pulse of one's own thoughts. The contrast between movement and stillness, between human connection and solitary contemplation, made the park feel almost alive, as if it sensed the emotions of those who walked within it. As the sun continued its descent, the golden hour deepened, bathing everything in hues of amber and soft apricot. Shadows stretched and softened, blending with the warmth of sunlight that caught in the tips of leaves, the edges of cobblestones, and the gentle sway of small branches. The park, in all its subtle complexity, created a perfect stage for the story that was about to unfold, a story of isolation, quiet observation, and the first delicate stirrings of hope. Each detail, the scent of pastries, the rustle of leaves, the distant laughter, the golden sunlight, worked together to craft an atmosphere that was calm yet emotionally charged, intimate yet alive, a setting where life and human emotion could collide in unexpected, transformative ways. Amid the golden hour light that bathed the urban park in warmth, she sat quietly, a figure both delicate and resolute. The mid-20s woman, fair-skinned and intelligent, maneuvered her wheelchair along the cobblestone path with a practiced ease, her hands steady despite the occasional bump. Her eyes, a soft hazel, scanned the surroundings with quiet vigilance, taking in the laughter of children chasing one another and the rhythmic footsteps of joggers passing by. Beneath her composed exterior, a subtle tension lingered, a trace of sadness and self-doubt, remnants of countless days spent feeling shunned, dismissed, or the object of whispered mockery. Yet she carried herself with dignity, clad in a simple, elegant outfit, a pastel blouse tucked neatly into comfortable trousers, paired with soft flats reflecting a personal pride. that no judgment could easily diminish. Her gaze occasionally flicked to a nearby bench where a group of her peers congregated. Their chatter was light, almost casual, yet beneath the surface lay a subtle current of exclusion. They exchanged glances, whispered comments, and occasional smirks that never went unnoticed by her keen eyes. Their laughter was sharp, almost predatory, highlighting the contrast between their ease in the world and her cautious navigation of it. Though the mockery was never overtly cruel, each slight gesture, each rolling of eyes or exchanged smirk, carved a quiet hollow in her confidence. And yet, even in that isolation, she observed the world with a sensitivity and depth that others seldom appreciated. The way a child's kite dipped and soared, the flutter of a bird's wing against the soft sunlight, she noticed it all. Small details that hinted at beauty and hope even in difficult days. It was in this moment, while she paused to watch a stray leaf drift lazily on the breeze, that he appeared subtle, unassuming, yet impossible to ignore. The late-20s black man moved through the park with an effortless calm, his deep brown skin glowing in the soft afternoon light. His presence was grounded yet approachable, radiating a quiet confidence that needed no announcement. He wore a simple t-shirt, jeans, and a light jacket, his attire practical but neatly put together, signaling someone who lived life with care and intention. As he approached a small park path, he noticed her, not with curiosity born of idle glance, but with a gentle attentiveness that seemed to recognize her as a person fully worthy of attention. There was a softness in his eyes, a subtle tilt of his head that conveyed empathy, an openness that spoke of small, consistent acts of kindness that he carried through his daily life. Across the park, her peers continued their shallow chatter, their gestures casual but layered with exclusion. They were a study in contrasts to him, polished in appearance, yet lacking substance, loud in presence, yet blind to the quieter, more meaningful world unfolding nearby. Every glance they threw her way seemed to carry judgment, subtle yet persistent, highlighting the isolation she had endured for so long. And yet, the man approaching her seemed untouched by this superficiality. There was no performance in his movements, no need to assert superiority. He simply existed with integrity, a calm counterpoint to the clamor of shallow commentary surrounding her. As he drew near, a quiet tension filled the space between them. Her initial glance met his, a brief exchange loaded with unspoken recognition, a hint of curiosity, of cautious hope. She noticed the small details that revealed his character, the way he adjusted the strap of his bag with understated care, how his posture remained open and unhurried, the subtle smile that softened his features without demanding anything in return. Each gesture, each measured movement, suggested a depth of compassion that she had longed for but rarely encountered. In that golden hour light, the park became more than a backdrop. It was a stage upon which the quiet drama of human connection was about to unfold. The contrasts were clear: the shallow, judgmental world of her peers on one side, the calm, grounded integrity of a man who might see her truly for the first time on the other. And in the midst of it, she felt a flicker of something unfamiliar, a cautious, tentative hope that perhaps, for the first time in a long while, someone might embrace her fully, not in spite of her differences, but including them. The park, bathed in the mellow golden light of late afternoon, was alive with motion and sound: joggers pacing steadily, children squealing as they darted between benches, and the soft clatter of cups from the nearby cafe blending with the distant hum of the city. Yet amidst this vibrancy, she felt an invisible weight pressing down upon her. The mid-20s woman, fair-skinned and navigating the world in her wheelchair, moved slowly along the cobblestone path, every turn of the wheels deliberate, measured. Her eyes flicked nervously to the groups nearby, catching the faint smirks and subtle gestures from those who had long since decided she did not belong. Friends, colleagues, classmates, people who should have been companions in the rhythm of life had instead become shadows of judgment, whispers curling around her like smoke. She had learned to anticipate their reactions: the polite nod that was never truly meant, the laugh that died quickly when her gaze shifted, the way chairs were arranged just out of reach or tables shifted ever so slightly, so that she was an afterthought in their gatherings. Each microaggression, though small, in isolation, compounded into a weight she carried silently. The sunlight glinted off her wheelchair, illuminating her hands resting lightly on the rims, fingers tightening briefly as she steadied herself against the invisible currents of exclusion. A subtle flinch passed across her face as a whispered joke floated from a nearby bench. The words were indistinct, but the tone was unmistakable. She bit her lip, fighting the familiar rush of embarrassment and the sting of loneliness that often followed. Yet, even as the shadows of social exclusion fell upon her, there were moments when her inner resilience shimmered like sunlight through leaves. A stray dog wandered near the path, sniffing cautiously at the edges of the cafe's outdoor seating. She smiled softly, her fingers gently reaching out to pat its head, murmuring quiet words of reassurance. It was a small act, unnoticed by anyone else, but in it lay a fragment of her enduring compassion. Her eyes softened as she straightened, her posture just slightly, as if reminding herself that kindness was a choice, even when the world refused to recognize her worth. Her gaze drifted to a notebook resting in the basket of her wheelchair, a constant companion and witness to her inner life. Inside, pages filled with careful handwriting documented her observations of the world, how sunlight fell across the park in shifting patterns, the quiet rhythm of a street musician's song, the laughter of children blending with the distant aroma of pastries from the cafe. These small details, the minutiae of life others overlooked, had become her sanctuary, a realm where judgment could not follow. Each entry was a reminder that she possessed a perspective shaped by empathy, insight, and strength. Though she was isolated in many ways, her heart remained open, attuned to beauty, subtle humor, and acts of goodness that often went unnoticed. The whispers and glances of her peers persisted, but she had learned to navigate them with quiet vigilance. Her shoulders tensed briefly as a group of colleagues passed, their casual laughter and veiled comments echoing in her ears. She forced a measured breath, letting the tension ease just enough to maintain composure, reminding herself that their opinions did not define her. The sunlight, now softer and more golden, illuminated the contours of her face, revealing both the lingering traces of doubt and the faint glimmer of determination. In her hazel eyes, she had learned to survive this daily theater of subtle cruelty, but survival was no longer enough. She longed for recognition that transcended pity or token acknowledgement, a connection built on genuine understanding and shared humanity. And then, somewhere in the distance, beyond the reach of shallow glances and whispered judgment, she caught sight of someone who moved differently through the world. A black man, late 20s, deep brown skin, approachable and calm, carried himself with an understated presence that commanded neither attention nor admiration, yet somehow drew her gaze. His actions were simple, helping a street vendor straighten a crate, smiling softly at passers-by, but they radiated authenticity and quiet integrity. In that instant, amid the swirl of exclusion and judgment, a small ember of hope flickered within her, a delicate, fragile curiosity that perhaps someone could see her, truly see her, beyond the surface that others judged. The park seemed to hold its breath for a moment, the golden sunlight catching in leaves and shadows alike, creating a space where isolation met the possibility of recognition. Though subtle bullying had marked her day, and though the weight of social exclusion pressed heavily, she felt, for the first time, the faintest sense of anticipation that kindness might exist, not as a distant ideal, but as a tangible presence, waiting to bridge the gap between her world and someone who would embrace it fully. The golden light of the late afternoon draped the urban park in a warm, honeyed glow, softening the edges of the bustling world around her. She maneuvered her wheelchair along the familiar cobblestone path, wheels turning steadily as her hands guided them with quiet precision. Her eyes, hazel and watchful, traced the familiar contours of the park, the cafe spilling the rich aroma of coffee and pastries into the air, children darting and laughing between benches, joggers moving with rhythmic determination. Despite the comforting familiarity, a low hum of tension followed her, a residue of countless days spent under the subtle scrutiny of peers who whispered, stared, or offered feigned smiles that barely concealed judgment. She paused for a moment, at the base of a slight incline, the path ahead uneven with the gentle rise of cobblestones. It was a minor obstacle, one she had navigated countless times. Yet the familiar sense of vigilance flickered through her body. Just as she was adjusting her grip, she noticed him, a young black man, late 20s, deep brown skin glowing softly in the golden light. He moved across the park with a calm, unassuming presence, his posture relaxed but confident, steps measured and purposeful. There was no display of superiority in the way he walked, no exaggerated gestures meant to draw attention. Instead, every movement carried an air of quiet attentiveness, as though he had the rare ability to notice things most overlooked. Their eyes met briefly, and she felt a subtle shift in the air, a gentle tug that drew her attention more fully. He noticed her hesitating at the incline, and without fanfare, approached with steady, careful steps. "Do you need a hand with that?" he asked, voice soft, calm, entirely free from pity or judgment. It was a simple question, ordinary in its structure, yet extraordinary in the care it conveyed. The world had offered her many gestures of condescension, disguised as kindness. But this was different. She hesitated, a mixture of caution and curiosity tightening in her chest. Past experiences had taught her to be wary, to anticipate ulterior motives or shallow sympathy. Yet something in the way he waited patiently, eyes steady and attentive, made her doubt the familiar assumptions. There was no rush, no expectation, only presence. The sunlight caught the edges of his short, curly hair, highlighting the gentle intensity in his dark eyes. Even in this fleeting moment, his character seemed to radiate from the simplest actions, a subtle tilt of the head, a relaxed stance, a soft smile that did not demand a response. Finally, she nodded, voice barely above a whisper, "Yes, thank you." Her hands rested lightly on the rims of her wheelchair as he stepped closer, guiding it over the uneven stones with deliberate care. The act was small, almost mundane, yet each motion conveyed consideration, a recognition that she was capable, worthy, and seen. She found herself studying him, noticing the practical neatness of his attire, t-shirt and jeans, light jacket, but more than that, the integrity in his movements, the quiet humility that seemed woven into every gesture. As they reached the top of the incline, he gave a reassuring nod. "There you go," he said gently, his tone calm and grounding. "All set." The simplicity of the statement, the absence of exaggerated flattery or forced concern, left her momentarily breathless. For a split second, she allowed herself to imagine a world in which people treated her not as a burden or spectacle, but as a person deserving of attention, kindness, and respect. In that suspended moment, the park seemed to shrink around them, the distant laughter and cafe noises fading into a soft murmur. Her peers, engaged in shallow chatter across the park, were no longer part of her immediate reality. Instead, there was only the quiet connection forming in the golden light, a delicate thread stretching across space that neither of them yet fully understood. She noticed the subtle clues of his character, the care in his hands, the measured calm of his presence, the gentle warmth that seemed to radiate from him without effort. It was a quiet magnetism, the kind that invited trust. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, she gave a small, tentative smile, feeling an unfamiliar flutter of curiosity in her chest. For the first time that afternoon, and perhaps for many days before, she felt genuinely seen. Not for her disability, not for her isolation, not for the quiet judgments of others, but simply for who she was in that very moment, and in his steady gaze and patient demeanor. The beginning of something remarkable began to take root, a connection born of authenticity, small kindness, and the promise of understanding that might one day grow into something far greater. The days that followed in the park seemed to unfold with a rhythm all their own. Each afternoon a quiet stage upon which the fragile beginnings of a connection slowly took shape. She arrived, as she often did, wheels tracing familiar cobblestone, paths, notebook resting in the basket before her, fingers brushing lightly over its leather cover as if grounding herself in the presence of the tangible world. He was there again, often at first unnoticed, quietly attending to small tasks, a vendor who had tipped over a crate, a child who had dropped a toy, a stray dog sniffing near the cafe entrance. Each action was subtle, seemingly ordinary, yet she could not help noticing the effortless care with which he moved through the park. Their first few exchanges were brief and tentative, A shared nod, a polite smile, the casual remark about the weather or the sunlight filtering through the leaves. Yet even in these small gestures, a sense of authenticity emerged, one that contrasted sharply with the performative kindness she had learned to recognize and mistrust. Each encounter added a layer of intrigue. Why did he not look away? Why did his words carry no condescension, no obligation, no sense of superiority? She found herself lingering in the park longer than usual, wheels turning slowly, ears attuned to his soft voice, eyes drawn repeatedly to the way he moved with purpose yet gentleness. Over time, the conversations deepened. He asked her questions not intrusive, but curious in a way that invited honesty. What are you sketching today?" he asked once, leaning casually against a tree as she flipped open her notebook. She hesitated at first, then allowed herself to share the careful lines and shaded figures she had drawn of the park, of passing children, of the stray dog she had befriended. He listened intently, eyes focused, a subtle nod punctuating her words, a soft, "That's beautiful," offered without exaggeration, but with evident sincerity. In that moment, the world of shallow judgments receded, replaced by something rare, a space where she felt truly seen. Small acts of his character became increasingly apparent. She watched him help an elderly man navigate a tricky step, retrieve a wallet dropped by a distracted passerby, and share his lunch with a hungry street cat curled in the shadow of a bench. Each deed, quiet and uncelebrated, hinted at a deeper sense of empathy and integrity. The park seemed to mirror the unfolding connection, the golden sunlight reflecting in his eyes as he crouched to tie a child's shoelace, the breeze carrying the faint scent of coffee from the nearby cafe, while his laughter mingled with hers, light and unforced. She began to notice subtler nuances as well, the way he remembered her favorite corner of the park, the careful attention he gave to the details she mentioned in passing, the way he never rushed her words, never cut her off. Each gesture reinforced the sense that his presence was not fleeting or superficial. It was deliberate, steady, and genuine. Where others had seen her disability as a defining feature, he seemed never to notice it as anything other than one aspect of her being. Their laughter became more frequent, delicate and tentative at first, then freer, mingling with the distant sounds of the city and the rustling of leaves. In the soft afternoon breeze, she discovered that he had a quiet sense of humor, the kind that arrived without fanfare, turning ordinary observations into moments of shared amusement. And though the park was filled with passersby, their interactions became a small, private world, a space where judgment and exclusion held no dominion. Clues about his deeper story emerged in glimpses. A fleeting conversation revealed he volunteered at a local youth center, another, that he had assisted in community projects quietly, without seeking recognition. He never boasted, never hinted at heroism, but each story, each small revelation, painted a portrait of someone who lived his principles consistently, without expectation of reward or acclaim. She found herself drawn not only to his kindness, but to the authenticity that threaded through every action. By the time the sun began its slow descent, casting the park in deep golds and soft ambers, a bond had begun to take shape, subtle, fragile, yet undeniable. It was a connection born not of spectacle or grand gestures, but of attention, empathy, and shared moments that layered trust over the foundation of mutual respect. In the gentle warmth of late afternoon, she realized something stirring within her chest, hope, a quiet, tentative hope that someone could see her for who she truly was. And perhaps, in time, that recognition could blossom into something extraordinary. The late afternoon sunlight cast long, warm shadows across the park, and she found herself lingering near the same oak tree where they had first spoken. Her mind replayed the moments of laughter, the quiet conversations, and the subtle ways he had made her feel seen. She had begun to trust the simplicity of his presence, the gentle cadence of his voice, and the authenticity in every smile and gesture. Yet, even in that growing comfort, a whisper of doubt lingered, a small, cautious voice reminding her that people often wore masks, that kindness sometimes concealed ulterior motives. It was during one of these quiet moments, when the wind carried the scent of fresh coffee from the cafe, that she noticed a small envelope tucked between the pages of her notebook. Her brow furrowed in confusion. She had no memory of leaving it there. Tentatively, she opened it. Inside was a note, neatly handwritten, and beneath it, a check for a modest sum, enough to cover unexpected medical bills her family had been quietly struggling with. Her heart tightened as realization dawned. This was not a random act of charity, but a gesture of care, directed with foresight and discretion. The revelation deepened moments later when she overheard a conversation near the cafe. A vendor she frequented mentioned that someone had paid off a debt anonymously, someone who had insisted their help remain unseen. Details trickled together like a puzzle forming before her eyes, and she felt her pulse quicken. This was the same man, the one who had guided her up the cobblestone path, who had listened to her without judgment, who had offered small kindnesses without expectation. He had been present in ways she could never have imagined, quietly supporting her life beyond. Their encounters in the park. Emotions collided within her: surprise, gratitude, and a sudden swell of warmth. She recalled the subtle defenses he had mounted without her knowledge, a discreet word to colleagues, when she had been the subject of whispered ridicule, a quiet reassurance to her family during moments of struggle, the attention to small details that indicated he had been watching, caring, always thinking beyond what was visible. The man she had admired for his presence in the park had been weaving a tapestry of support that reached into her life in ways she never anticipated. Her mind spun, tracing the countless small interactions she had once dismissed as chance. The stray dog he had fed, the gentle encouragement when she had hesitated to speak, the perfectly timed smiles that had seemed casual now all carried a deeper significance. Each act was no longer isolated. They were threads in a larger, deliberate pattern of kindness. She realized that he had been present long before she had truly noticed, his concern and empathy extending into corners of her life she had assumed were invisible to others. Tears pricked at her eyes, unbidden yet wholly deserved. She felt a profound shift within her, the kind that altered perception and deepened understanding. He was not merely a kind stranger. He was someone who had chosen, quietly and consistently, to be an ally, a protector, and a source of light in a world that had often been cold. The weight of past isolation seemed to lift, replaced by awe and a fragile but growing sense of trust. In that golden hour light, the park seemed to hold its breath, as if acknowledging the significance of the revelation. She watched him across the way, unaware that she had discovered the breadth of his compassion. Her heart swelled with a new understanding not only of his character, but of the rare depth of connection he offered. It was a bond built not on circumstance or spectacle, but on deliberate, thoughtful, and unassuming acts of love. The man who had first caught her attention with a simple smile had, in truth, been quietly shaping a world where she could finally feel safe, valued, and seen for who she truly was. The park was bathed in the amber glow of the late afternoon sun, shadows stretching long across the cobblestone paths. She paused at a familiar corner, hands resting lightly on the rims of her wheelchair, heart racing in a mixture of apprehension and anticipation. The man who had quietly reshaped her perception of trust and kindness was nearby, casually adjusting a bench for an elderly visitor, his presence calm yet compelling. Today, she knew, the invisible walls she had built around herself faced a moment of reckoning. Her peers lingered at the edge of the path, subtle smirks and whispered comments flickering across their faces like shadowy reminders of the isolation she had endured for so long. They did not understand why she lingered longer in the park, why she seemed drawn to someone who could so effortlessly see her worth. The contrast was stark, superficial judgment versus genuine care. Her chest tightened as she realized the choice before her continued to shrink beneath their shallow scrutiny, hiding her vulnerability and retreating into the safety of invisibility, or embrace the quiet, unwavering kindness of the man who had become a light in her world. Her eyes met his across the small distance, and in that moment, something inside her shifted. The fear that had always tempered her steps, the anxiety that her worth was conditional on the approval of others began to dissolve. A fragile courage took its place. Slowly, she pushed forward, her movements steady but resolute. Guided by the presence of someone whose integrity had become her anchor, she approached him, and as she did, she caught the subtle expression of concern and anticipation on his face. a mirror of her own tentative hope. You've shown me so much," she whispered, voice trembling slightly, more than anyone else ever has. Her gaze flicked briefly toward the group of peers who watch with thinly veiled judgment, then returned to him. "And I want to see it all with you." Her words carried vulnerability, but also the unspoken acknowledgement of her trust, the recognition that this connection had become something she could no longer resist. He extended a hand gently, not in ceremony but in affirmation, his eyes soft yet unwavering. "You don't need to hide anymore," he said. "Not from me, not from anyone who matters." The warmth of his presence wrapped around her like sunlight, steadying her racing thoughts, calming the flutter of doubt and fear. At that moment, some of her peers approached, a flicker of confrontation in their expressions. Yet as they reached her, they found only the calm, unwavering gaze of someone who had chosen authenticity over appearance. The man's presence beside her was not intimidating, but it radiated a subtle strength, the kind that exposed the superficiality of judgment and highlighted the quiet power of genuine character. They faltered, words dying on their lips, unable to pierce the bond that had formed before their eyes. Tears welled in her eyes, unbidden but welcomed, as the tension melted into laughter and relief. He reached out, brushing a stray lock of hair from her face, and for the first time, she allowed herself to fully acknowledge the depth of her feelings. The world around them, the park, the golden light, the distant sounds of the city seemed to pause, framing the unspoken understanding between them. In that suspended moment, she realized the truth. Love had taken root not in spectacle or superficiality, but in the quiet, consistent, and unwavering recognition of who she truly was. And as the sunlight pooled around them, their hands intertwined, she felt the weight of judgment fall away entirely. Laughter mingled with tears, vulnerability merged with strength, and in the space between them, the promise of shared life began to take shape, a life where kindness, empathy, and mutual love would define their path, far beyond the shallow gaze of those who once sought to diminish her. The golden hour sunlight spilled across the park, casting long, gentle shadows over the cobblestone paths and lending a warm glow to the trees and benches that lined the winding walkways. The woman, fair-skinned and poised, guided her wheelchair, slowly, fingers tracing the familiar rims with a newfound ease. Her gaze, once cautious and filled with apprehension, now flickered with curiosity, anticipation, and a fragile but growing joy. At her side walked the man who had quietly transformed her world, late 20s, deep brown skin illuminated by the sun's soft warmth, his presence calm yet undeniably comforting. For months, she had navigated a world that often overlooked or dismissed her, learning to measure herself against the subtle judgments of others. She had endured whispered mockery, social exclusion, and the quiet sting of ignorance, all of it leaving invisible marks on her heart. Yet, through it all, he had been there, not in grand gestures or ostentatious displays, but in consistent, authentic acts of empathy and care. Each small kindness, each unassuming smile, each moment of attentive presence had woven a tapestry of trust between them. And now, standing in the park with sunlight warming their faces, she realized she no longer had to hide behind fear or doubt. With a deep, steadying breath, she turned to him, eyes meeting his in a gaze that spoke volumes. I want to be with you," she said softly, voice trembling not from uncertainty, but from the overwhelming weight of relief and happiness. "I trust you. I trust us." The words felt like a release, an affirmation of her worth not dictated by society's shallow measurements, but by the mutual respect and understanding that had grown between them. He smiled gently, a warmth in his dark eyes that made her heart lift. "And I promise," he replied, "I'll be here, not because of who you are supposed to be, or how others see you, but because of who you are. Every part of you matters to me." The sincerity in his tone wrapped around her like the sun's golden light, steadying the flutter of emotion that threatened to overwhelm her. She allowed herself to lean slightly toward him, feeling a comfort she had rarely known, a sense of belonging that required no explanation, no conditions, no apologies. As they began to roll along the path together, side by side, the park seemed to respond to their presence. The distant laughter of children, once a reminder of her isolation, now sounded like music accompanying their steps. Leaves rustled gently in the breeze, and the faint aroma of coffee and fresh pastries mingled with the warmth of sunlight, creating a space that felt both ordinary and sacred. Round them, the world continued its rhythm, but for a moment, the park existed solely for them, a private sanctuary of trust, empathy, and genuine connection. She caught sight of her peers in the distance, their expressions a mix of surprise, confusion, and quiet reflection. Yet she felt no need to confront them, no desire to explain or justify. The judgment that had once held such weight now seemed inconsequential, dwarfed by the authenticity of what she shared with him. It was not wealth, appearance, or approval from others that defined her life's meaning. It was kindness, integrity, and mutual respect, and he had shown her all of that, patiently, consistently, without expectation of reward beyond the simple act of caring. Their hands found each other, fingers intertwining naturally, a silent affirmation of shared understanding and love. Warm smiles spread across their faces, echoing the serenity and light around them. Each movement, each glance, seemed to cast the world anew, highlighting the value of empathy, courage, and embracing life authentically. The sun dipped lower, bathing the park in rich, golden hues, long shadows stretching gracefully behind them as they continued forward together. In that moment, the lesson crystallized. True worth is not measured by one's abilities, appearances, or society's fleeting approval. It is measured in kindness extended without expectation, empathy offered in quiet moments, integrity displayed consistently, and the courage to accept and give love fully. And as they moved through the golden hour light, their presence side by side became a living testament to that truth and narrative of hope, acceptance, and the enduring power of genuine human connection. The park, serene and bathed in amber warmth, held witness to their union. The sunlight reflected softly on their intertwined hands, their smiles calm yet radiant, and in every detail the rustle of leaves, the distant laughter, the gentle breeze, a story of resilience, love, and moral triumph was etched into the moment, a lasting symbol of hope for anyone who had ever felt unseen. The golden afternoon light dappled through the park's trees, illuminating the cobblestone paths with a honeyed glow. She wheeled herself slowly along the familiar route, notebook resting in the basket before her, hands brushing lightly over its cover as if grounding herself against the invisible weight of scrutiny. Her hazel eyes flickered across the benches and cafe tables, catching glimpses of people who glanced her way with faint judgment, their whispered comments barely audible yet unmistakable. Every step, every turn of the wheels carried a subtle tension, a blend of caution, curiosity, and the quiet ache of long-practiced self-restraint. From across the park, he watched her, observant, calm, unobtrusive. The black man, late 20s, deep brown skin glowing warmly in the sunlight, carried himself with a balance of confidence and humility. His posture relaxed, yet every movement was intentional, every gesture considerate. He noticed the slight flinch as her peers passed by, the gentle tightening of her shoulders when a whispered remark grazed her ears. Without overtly intervening, he positioned himself where he could help, an unseen guardian whose presence seemed to radiate steady reassurance. She sensed him before she fully saw him, a subtle shift in the atmosphere, a warmth in the periphery of her awareness. Her heart beat faster, a mixture of anticipation and cautious curiosity. Who was this man whose eyes held a quiet empathy, whose movements carried a gentleness she had rarely encountered? In the days leading to this moment, she had begun to notice the small, almost imperceptible acts: a stray dog fed, a wallet discreetly returned, a struggling street vendor aided. Without fanfare, each gesture seemed minor, yet together they painted a picture of character that resonated deeply, challenging the assumptions she had formed about the world. Her perspective shifted as she watched him interact with others. A child stumbled near a bench. He bent gracefully to steady the small frame, offering words of reassurance that were soft, non-judgmental, and entirely natural. An elderly woman struggled to lift a heavy bag. He approached quietly, hands steady and attentive, guiding her without drawing attention. Even in these small moments, she began to piece together an image of someone whose kindness was consistent, deliberate, and authentic. From his point of view, She was equally captivating, not for her vulnerability, but for the strength that threaded through it. He noticed the way her eyes traced the world around her, capturing details most would miss: the shifting sunlight on leaves, the subtle sounds of the cafe, the distant laughter of children mingling with the soft hum of the city. He admired her resilience, her attentiveness, and the quiet dignity with which she navigated spaces that often overlooked her. Each act of care he had offered in the past, whether directly or indirectly, was a deliberate choice to support, protect, and honor her world without expecting recognition. Suspense built subtly, a gentle tension in the air. She could sense that his goodness ran deeper than the surface gestures she had observed. Clues were sprinkled carefully: his discreet interventions, the whispered thanks from those he had aided, the small envelopes and unnoticed gestures that had supported her family and community. Each revelation unfolded gradually, layering the story of his character like sunlight filtering through dense foliage, illuminating the depth and authenticity of his intentions. In the warm glow of the park, they moved through this unfolding narrative, together, unaware of the profound bond taking root. Her heart began to recognize a truth she had longed for, and the subtle glimpses of his past deeds created a suspenseful yet believable arc, a story of integrity, empathy, and a love quietly building, waiting for the moment when it could fully reveal itself.